After the American Civil War, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, or Reconstruction Amendments, were put into place. These amendments abolished slavery, gave equal privileges and immunities to all citizens, and gave all citizens the right to vote. But even after these amendments were enacted, segregation continued in the U.S. and was even exhibited within schools. In 1970, parents of colored children took a stand against segregation within schools and took the Boston School Committee to court, accusing the committee of purposefully segregating schools and by doing so deliberately violating the 14th Amendment and the Racial Imbalance Act, which stated that schools must desegregate or will lose school funding. After seeing the racial discrimination within the Boston Public Schools himself, Judge W. Arthur Garrity ruled in the parents' favor and called for desegregation of the Boston Public Schools. The schools would pursue the desegregation by creating a new school busing system and would send white students to schools primarily made of colored students and send colored students to schools of primarily white students. The order was officially in place on June 21, 1974. But along with removing segregation from Boston public schools, the order created a lot of widespread unrest and faced a lot of controversy. It eventually led to a series of protests, which involved violence and even the boycotting of Boston public schools. These protests that took place in Boston from 1974 to 1980 are now commonly known as the Boston Busing Riots.
Boston busing occurred in response to the 1965 Racial Imbalance Act, which ordered public schools into forced desegregation. The plan for Boston busing was created by W. Arthur Garrity, Jr., a member of the United States District Court for the District of Massachusetts. White students from predominantly white areas of Boston were bused to areas of Boston predominantly black and vice versa. This resulted in aggression between blacks and whites. This forced integration aroused fierce protest from white Bostonians. Profanities were screamed at African American children as they proceeded from the bus to the front door of the school. Also, Judge Garrity was personally attacked. People argued that since he lived in a white suburb, his children were not affected by the forced busing. A white bus driver by the name of Quinlan recollects transporting black children to schools in South Boston. She says, quote, "The black kids, they were nervous. I used to wish that somebody would smile and wave good morning. No, there was none of that," end quote. Some white parents accepted the integration of schools. South Boston mother Margaret Coughlin stated, quote, "We were opposed to it, but at the same time we didn't want any trouble. We didn't want any kids to get hurt, and we were willing to have students, both black and white, receive their education without any violence," end quote. Other white parents considered this change a disruption in their child's education and thus future. Some raised signs which read, quote, "We are not racists, pigs, animals. We are parents," end quote. Black students were scared and frustrated with being forced to attend a school in a predominantly white neighborhood where they were not welcomed. A 14-year-old black student at the time, Arnita, states, quote, "When you go to school under the veil of uncertainty, not knowing if you are going to have a good day without incident, or it's going to be something going on where there's an early dismissal, or you're going to get into a fight. That's a heavy burden to bear. It really is."
In 1965, Massachusetts had passed into law the Racial Imbalance Act, which ordered school districts to desegregate or risk losing state educational funding. It was opposed by many in Boston, especially less well-off white ethnic areas, such as the Irish American district of South Boston. Judge W. Arthur Garrity used a busing plan developed by the Massachusetts State Board of Education to implement the state's racial imbalance law that had been passed, requiring any school with a student enrollment that was more than 50% non-white to be balanced according to race. The conflict in Boston over busing primarily affected the traditionally Irish American neighborhoods and the traditionally Italian American neighborhoods. In one part of the plan, Judge Garrity decided that the entire junior class from the mostly poor white South Boston school would be bused to Roxbury High School, a black high school. Half the sophomores from each school would attend the other, and seniors could decide what school to attend. David Froome asserts that South Boston and Roxbury were generally regarded as the two worst schools in Boston, and it was never clear what educational purpose was to be served by jumbling them. Whites and blacks also began entering through different doors. The Boston busing tried to end segregation and make the schooling system fair and equal, although many disapproved of integrating the buses in schools. Whites did not want to attend schools where they were forced to be integrated with blacks, and the attendance rate fell drastically from 60,000 to 40,000 of the 100,000 enrolled students. People targeted during the busing usually attacked Judge Garrity, claiming that because he lived in a white suburb, his own children were not affected by the ruling. Another important difference in the suburbs was that the white students were not bused away from their neighborhoods.
Many whites feared change and they rose up to suppress it. This caused many riots and protests to occur. One particular incident happened on April 5, 1976, as Theodore Landsmark, a black attorney, was leaving a City Hall building. White students gathered there to protest against integrating South Boston High School. As Landsmark walked out of the building, one protester yelled, "Get the Negro." Soon after, the protesters surrounded Landsmark and started beating him. A photograph was taken, courtesy of Stanley Foreman, showing Landsmark being held back by a couple of white students as the flag bearer, Joseph Rakes, appeared to be getting ready to stab Landsmark. It remains unclear whether Rakes was actually preparing to stab Landsmark or was just swinging Old Glory. The protest only lasted for about 15 to 20 minutes and ended as quickly as it started. As the crowd dispersed, Landsmark was left concussed with a broken nose and shattered glasses. It wasn't just the whites attacking the blacks, though. The picture by Foreman sparked rage through black communities. The next day in Roxbury, a group of black teens threw rocks at a white man while he was driving, causing him to crash. The teens dragged the man out of his car and started crushing his skull with nearby paving stones. When police arrived, they found 100 black youths surrounding a white man chanting, "Let him die." The abuse caused the man to fall into a coma, which he did not survive. In another incident, a white student was nearly stabbed to death by a fellow black at South Boston High School. Angry white parents mobbed the school, trapping the black students inside. This event forced the school to close for a month. When it reopened, it became one of the first schools to install metal detectors and included 500 police officers guarding the 400 students inside.
Boston has certainly come a long way since this period in history. The city is much more racially diverse, with people of color making up more than half of its population, up from less than a third in 1980. And Massachusetts has had a black governor in the State House for 7 years now. In October 2004, the Boston School Committee was chosen to be the recipient of the first award for Urban School Board Excellence for demonstrating the 4 core areas: board governance, closing the achievement gap, academic achievement, and community engagement. Medco is also currently the largest and oldest voluntary desegregation program in the United States, busing 3,300 students from Boston and Springfield to 38 predominantly white suburban community schools, including Reading Memorial High School.